Hello everyone, welcome back. Today, we're diving into one of the most debated topics in aviation history, the battle between two legendary World War II bombers, the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress and a consolidated B-24 Liberator. Which aircraft was truly superior? This debate started among crew members during the war and has continued ever since, particularly within the 8th Air Force. The B-17 was more dominant. Many war correspondents reported on air battles over Germany fought by B-17 crews in the summer of 1943, reinforcing the belief that this aircraft was the best bomber ever built. Origins and controversy of the B-17 and B-24. Since the war ended, many aviation historians and writers have supported the notion that the B-17 was superior. However, this claim is often based on personal opinion and individual experiences rather than statistical data or aircraft performance analysis. Many B-17 enthusiasts use emotion to support their arguments, often referring to photographs of aircraft that returned to base riddled with bullet holes, yet still managed to survive enemy attacks. Veterans of the B-24 have similar sentiments about their aircraft. Families of B-17 crew members often quote war correspondent Andy Rooney, who once stated that if he had to fly in combat, he would prefer to be in a B-17. However, Rooney himself only flew a few missions in a B-17 and never had first-hand experience flying in a B-24. The combat records of both aircraft exist, and they indicate that the claims made by B-17 advocates may be based more on nostalgia than on hard facts. Development of the B-17 and B-24. Both the B-17 and B-24 emerged from an early 1930s philosophy that long-range bombers could be used to defend the United States by locating and sinking enemy invasion fleets before they reached American shores. This concept was championed by Brigadier General Billy Mitchell and was widely accepted among U.S. Army Air Corps officers. However, later events would prove this strategy to have significant limitations. Initially, the Army Air Corps sought a long-range bomber with a 5,000-mile range, leading to the development of the B-15 and B-19. However, both aircraft were underpowered due to the limitations of available engines at the time. The multi-engine bomber. As a compromise, the Army proposed a more realistic project, which ultimately led to the creation of the B-17, B-24, and later the B-29 Superfortress. This initiative, known as Project A, only specified that the aircraft needed to be a multi-engine bomber. Most aircraft manufacturers interpreted this requirement as calling for a twin-engine design. However, Boeing took a different approach by adding 2 additional engines, thereby increasing both payload capacity and operational range. The B-17 prototype first flew in 1935, with deliveries beginning in early 1937. Although the B-17 had impressive performance capabilities, its combat radius was limited to about 1,000 miles, prompting the Army to seek alternatives. This led to the development of the B-29 and B-32, and increased interest in a new design proposed by Consolidated Aircraft, which eventually became the B-24 Liberator. Development and deployment of the B-24A. In January 1939, at the request of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, General Henry Hap Arnold, the commander of the U.S. Army Air Corps, issued a requirement for a 4-engine bomber capable of flying 3,000 miles, reaching speeds over 300 miles per hour, and operating at an altitude of 35,000 feet. Drawing from prior aircraft designs and their expertise in long-range flying boats, Consolidated developed a prototype based on a 1937 concept, which was airborne by the end of the year. Recognizing its potential, the Army ordered 7 B-24 prototypes for testing and 36 B-24 as for operational use, even before the aircraft's first flight. Evolving role of the B-24A. By the time production of the aircraft began, war had erupted in Europe, and the U.S. had started supplying aircraft and military equipment to Britain and France. France, in need of long-range bombers, was set to receive a number of these new aircraft, which had been given the name Liberator, allegedly by Winston Churchill. However, after France fell, all aircraft initially intended for French use were redirected to Britain, where they were designated LB-30s. Due to their extended range, General George Brett recommended in late 1941 that some B-24s be reassigned from England to British forces in North Africa. As the war escalated, the U.S. Army repurposed most B-24 as into long-range transport aircraft, while a few were modified for reconnaissance missions. One such converted Liberator was on the ground at Hickam Field during the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The B-17's early combat performance. Before the U.S. officially entered the war, both the B-17 Flying Fortress and the new B-24 Liberator were tested in combat by the Royal Air Force. In the spring of 1941, the U.S. Army sent 20 B-17Cs to Britain for evaluation. While RAF crews initially praised the Flying Fortress for its durability under fire, the bomber's performance in combat proved disappointing. Mechanical failures were frequent, and its high altitude, daylight bombing accuracy was significantly lower than expected. The trial ended in failure. 3 B-17s were lost to enemy attacks, 5 were destroyed in accidents, and the remaining aircraft were grounded due to technical issues. Out of 39 sorties, only 18 B-17s managed to drop bombs, and only 2 bombs were believed to have hit their intended targets. Additionally, none of the aircraft's defensive guns managed to shoot down a single German fighter. Following the B-17's poor performance in British service, the U.S. Army Air Corps sought to understand the reasons behind its shortcomings. While the RAF initially appreciated the bomber's ability to endure enemy fire, their enthusiasm waned when the aircraft failed to deliver the expected results. U.S. military officials attributed the failures to the British decision to conduct high-altitude bombing, which caused unexpected issues such as frozen guns, frosted windshields, and oxygen system failures. At these altitudes, the B-17 lacked the speed and firepower to adequately defend against enemy attacks. Ironically, the British had operated the aircraft under conditions that some U.S. Army Air Corps officers had argued were feasible, despite American training protocols emphasizing lower altitude operations.